used to think that the tendency to find God and salvation and meaning and goodness somewhere far away, separate, other, was a religious thing. I've kind of come to understand that it might be a very human thing. The religions have certainly done that, looking for God far at tops of mountains, in an ascetical life, in an emptying of oneself, we find that tendency in religion. But I think it represents a tendency of our lives. We tend to find all that is good and holy and meaningful and enjoyable far enough away that we can be envious of it. Probably not in our own Instagram account, but in somebody else's. And in that reality, I think that Christianity can be a beautiful antidote, helping us to find all that is beautiful and noble and good and true, imbuing our very complex and broken lives. Now, I say it can, certainly in our history, that hasn't always been our reality. We have often thought that to be good or holy meant you had to separate yourself away, be in a monastery, go out to the desert and become a hermit, maybe live on the top of a pole, far away and above everyone else. We have those tendencies because our human hearts are just like everybody else's. But at our core, maybe because of our deep Jewish roots, we find God at work in our very human, very broken, very imperfect reality. We find God coming into the life of Abraham and Sarah in a marriage that had been, to their great sadness, unfruitful, and he blesses their real lives. That we find that struggle between Isaac and his father as God asks of great faith and great sacrifice and touches at the core of their relationship. We find that in the kingship of David, but also of his son Solomon, to find God at work in that mess of a revolution of an oldest son who was rejected because his father preferred another mother, another wife, who he had stolen and murdered her former husband. Like all of that mess, and God very much leading his people at work, building his temple in the midst of all of that, in the midst of selfishness and weakness and triumph and goodness, that God finds his way into our lives. And today the church celebrates the Holy Family. And we could pretend that we have an Instagram reel of Jesus and Mary and Joseph in their quaint little home, and everything is perfect. And whenever Joseph comes up with some idea, it is wise and so good that Mary, even though she's perfect, can only say, Joseph, of course, let's do that. And every time that either of them have some need, Jesus automatically goes running to the well to bring back the water that they need. And nobody ever had to teach him to not be a selfish little child. But children all need to be taught that if they are going to be good adults. And Jesus became a wonderful adult because the reality of their life wasn't an Instagram reel, because the reality of their life was persecution. It was exile. It was having to start anew so many times. It was making their way to Nazareth, a backwater town in the northern regions of Israel, of Galilee, and having to start afresh, probably still being somewhat careful of their identity. It meant that baby Jesus had to learn just like all the other babies and had to go through all the terrible twos. And his mother didn't always know what to do with him. And she kept remembering that he was God's son, but he didn't always probably act like it because he had to grow and learn and grow in wisdom and knowledge just like every other child. More so, maybe, as he grew even more into this reality that from the beginning, he was God's son. And this real Holy Family, not the Instagram version, but the real Holy Family that struggled, that wasn't sure, that was scared, that in their fear probably sometimes had to work some things out together, right? That they the angel always appeared to Joseph, and Mary had to make sense third hand of what God wanted from them. And it took a lot of pondering, maybe some very painful pondering in her heart. And we read in our Christmas story, not the story of angels. Yes, Gabriel came and an angel came to the shepherds. But then these shepherds become the messengers. These travelers who aren't even Jewish become the messengers of God. That the history that unfolds in Egypt and Nazareth, that prophets and prophetesses in the temple, like all of this kind of complex mess is the story of the Holy Family. Because they weren't holy sitting on a mountain shining in God's glory. They were holy cooking and cleaning and struggling and trying to find some shelter and some food, because the complexities and struggles of their lives were the place of holiness. And that's not untrue in our lives. And the mother who gives of herself so generously and would place herself beside and for her teenage child, who at this point doesn't appear at all grateful or even cognizant of the gifts that are given, that this is true of a father who shuts the eyes of his 26-year-old son for the last time and helps him find a way to heaven, his heart broken. This is true of families who find themselves divided, and yet in the midst of those divisions and separations and maybe even divorce, and maybe blended, but not really blended, we use that as a euphemism, families, that God is still at work, and God is still blessing, and God is still making holiness happen in our broken and imperfect world. We celebrate today the family of Joseph and Mary and Jesus, but in that celebration, we recognize God at work in our world, in our lives, in our own Instagram reel that never looks as good as the one that we see of somebody else's family. But we know today in this celebration that God is here, that God is with us.